Part 1. They never wanted you to know the truth hiding beneath your own thoughts. Not the thoughts you speak, but the ones that watch you speak. Society calls it overthinking, intensity, too much. Jung called it something else entirely. He said your mind descends into depths most people will never touch. And that is precisely why they fear you. Because anyone who sees beneath appearances disrupts the game built on appearances. And deep thinkers, the real ones, the quiet ones, destroy illusions simply by existing. You were told to lighten up, to stop analyzing, to stop connecting dots that others pretend aren't there. But here is the forbidden truth. People don't want you to see deeply because shallow vision makes them comfortable. A mind that sees through masks is treated as a threat. A mind that refuses surface-level lies becomes an enemy of convenience. Machiavelli warned, a prince must learn to see the world as it is, not as he wishes it to be. The moment you saw the world as it is, you stopped belonging to it. You began to outgrow it. Your depth is not decoration. It is danger. Most people operate on a single layer of reality. The surface. They talk about weather, schedules, tasks, gossip. They live inside rituals that mean nothing. But your consciousness does something they can't even articulate. It descends. It digs. It expands. It sees the unconscious beneath speech, the pattern beneath emotion, the archetype beneath habit, the shadow beneath the smile. You witness all layers at once because the psyche you inhabit refuses the luxury of simplicity. And this difference in psychological structure is not random. It is architectural. It is destiny. You were built to perceive depth. They were built to fear it. But here is the paradox. The deeper you see, the more invisible you become. People cannot recognize what exceeds their perceptual limit. They hear you speak but cannot hear what you mean. You speak in 4 dimensions. They reply in 1, so you begin to shrink your language to fit their world. You simplify, you translate, you amputate your own mind just to be understood. And every time you do it, something inside you dies a little. Because you are not built for the surface. And every second you spend there is self-betrayal. Jung called this the burden of consciousness. Machiavelli would call it the burden of power. Because depth is power, but power isolates before it frees. Look around you. Most people think in straight lines. You think in constellations. Their minds stop where yours begins. When they say, "I'm fine," you see the denial, the grief, the wound, the story, the shadow. You see 6 layers behind a single sentence. You see the silence carrying more truth than their speech. And silence becomes your second language. Because it carries depth no one else knows how to receive. You are punished not because you are wrong, but because you are accurate. People cannot tolerate being seen too clearly. They feel naked in front of someone who reads the unconscious without permission. That is why they call you intense. That is why they say you analyze too much. What they really mean is, I feel exposed in your presence. Humans fear anything that strips away the illusions they live inside. The irony is almost poetic. They misunderstand you because they cannot understand themselves. And yet the deeper truth lies elsewhere. Your mind does not only perceive layers, it connects them. You see patterns forming long before others see symptoms. You see the repetition in relationships, the unconscious loops in behavior, the cultural currents beneath trends, the archetypes behind history. They think you predict the future. You don't. You simply see where the pattern is going because you saw where it began. This is why people think you are dramatic, negative, or paranoid. They confuse foresight with fear. They cannot see the storm until it is already breaking against their front door. By the time they react, you have already analyzed, processed, and accepted it. This is not anxiety. This is perceptual advantage. Depth always looks like madness to those drowning in the shallow. But here is the moment everything changes. The more patterns you see, the less patience you have for lies. Intellectual dishonesty feels like poison to your nervous system. Shallow thinking is not neutral to you. It is painful. Jung described this as the psyche's commitment to truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Machiavelli echoed the same truth centuries earlier. People are often deceived by appearances. But the prince must never be. You cannot unsee the flaw in an argument. You cannot unknow the manipulation behind a statement. You cannot pretend ignorance when your mind already holds the pattern. So you stay silent, or you speak and get punished. Both options cost you something. This is the quiet cruelty of the deep mind. You feel dishonesty the way others feel heat. You see contradiction the way others see color. And yet the world expects you to behave as if you do not notice what you cannot unsee. They want you to participate in conversations built on convenient fictions, social rituals masquerading as intellectual dialogue. But you refuse to lie to yourself just to belong. And that refusal distances you from everyone who still depends on those lies to feel safe. Here is where the loneliness begins. You live in a psychological space that most people will never enter. You listen to their words but hear their unconscious. You interact with the surface but live in the depths. You navigate their world while carrying a world they cannot fathom. Your mind becomes a private universe. Your silence becomes your sanctuary. Your solitude becomes your truth. And that truth is cold. And that truth is heavy. And that truth is real. Jung called it the loneliness of individuation. But Machiavelli would call it the loneliness of sovereignty. Because anyone who sees too much walks alone. This is not despair. It is the cost of power. The cost of consciousness. The cost of depth. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to observe. You were meant to see beneath. You were meant to stand apart until you find the few who can stand with you. Power grows in silence. Strength grows in distance. Sovereignty grows in invisibility. If this unsettles you, good. It means you were never prepared for power. But you are now. Part 2. There is a moment every deep thinker eventually faces. A moment when the world's noise becomes unbearable and the silence inside your own mind becomes the only place that feels honest. It is not a dramatic moment. It is not cinematic. It is quiet, almost invisible. A shift no one notices but you. A realization that you have crossed a threshold the rest of the world doesn't even know exists. Jung called it depth perception. Machiavelli would call it the beginnings of inner dominion. But you feel it as a quiet rupture. The second your mind begins to see all layers at once, you stop belonging to the surface world entirely. Most people fear the unknown. You fear the unexamined, the unreflected, the untrue. You fear what happens when people cling to illusions so tightly they begin to defend them like identity. And yet, this is the world you navigate daily. A world where people speak without thinking, react without perceiving, follow scripts they never wrote and play roles they never questioned. You see these scripts so clearly it feels like standing backstage, watching the actors stumble through lines they barely understand, masks slipping, motives exposed, archetypes playing themselves out again and again. And here is the paradox. The more clearly you see others, the more blurred you become to them. Your depth bends their perception. They mistake your silence for withdrawal, your distance for coldness, your insight for criticism. They cannot hear your meaning because they cannot reach your depth. And depth that cannot be met becomes distortion. Jung warned that deep thinkers are chronically misunderstood because their communication contains layers others cannot decode. Machiavelli would say the same phenomenon crowns the strategist. The more he sees, the less he reveals. You speak with precision, but they receive you with insecurity. You offer clarity, but they hear threat. You reveal patterns, but they hear pessimism. You speak of causes, but they hear blame. Their misunderstandings tell you nothing about yourself. They tell you everything about the limits of their perception. And yet the deeper truth lies elsewhere. Your mind is not only a deep system, it is a predictive one. You see events not as isolated points, but as unfolding architecture. Every conversation, every gesture, every inconsistency reveals a pattern. And patterns reveal outcomes. You feel them before they appear. You recognize them before they manifest. This is not intuition. It is psychological arithmetic. Most people experience time in a straight line. You experience it in loops. You see the repetition in people's choices, the cycles in their behavior, the unhealed wounds that reappear wearing new faces. You see the story beneath the story. And because you see the ending, you rarely enjoy the beginning. This is the quiet curse of foresight. To know too much too early. To feel the consequences before others even detect the cause. People call you overthinker as if depth is a defect, as if seeing complexity is a flaw, as if perceiving truth is an inconvenience. But the deeper your awareness becomes, the more allergic you grow to anything shallow. You sense manipulation the moment it forms. You feel inconsistency the moment it fractures. Intellectual dishonesty does not merely irritate you. It wounds something internal. Jung called this integrity of consciousness. Machiavelli simply said, "The prince must learn to see everything for what it is." The world wants you to lie politely. Your psyche refuses. And that refusal isolates you. Because here is the hidden mechanism. The deeper your perception, the less socially convenient you become. People don't want to be understood. They want to be comforted. They don't want truth. They want validation. They don't want depth. They want familiarity. You see too much. You pierce too deeply. And the moment someone feels you read the layer beneath their mask, they flinch. They retreat. They defend the very illusion that harms them. Your insight becomes their discomfort. Your clarity becomes their insecurity. Your depth becomes their fear. So you recede. You observe from a distance. You speak less, but understand more. This is where silence becomes a character. Your silence is not emptiness. It is architecture, structure, strategy. It is the fortress where your mind retreats to think at full depth without interruption. It is the shadow in which your perception sharpens. It is the mask you wear because the world cannot withstand your real face. Silence becomes the language of the powerful, not because they cannot speak, but because they know speech exposes advantages. Silence, to you, is not absence. It is a weapon. Yet the moment you notice this, everything changes. You begin to understand why your relationships feel uneven, why your conversations feel incomplete, why so many connections collapse before they truly begin. You are not too much. They are too little. Your depth is not intensity. It is clarity. Your honesty is not harshness. It is precision. Your reflection is not complication. It is awareness. But awareness makes you an outsider. You start realizing that fitting into the world requires shrinking your mind. And shrinking is a violence you can no longer commit against yourself. So you choose solitude, not as escape, but as alignment. Solitude becomes the only space where your depth is not a threat. Where your silence is not misread. Where your insight is not punished. It is the only space where you are whole. Jung called this existential loneliness. The solitude of someone who has individuated beyond the collective mind. Machiavelli would call it the loneliness of command. And both are correct. There is a kind of isolation reserved only for those who see reality across multiple layers at once. A kind of separation that feels fated. A kind of distance that feels inherited. A kind of solitude that feels like destiny rather than defect. This loneliness is not a flaw in you. It is a flaw in the world. You are not misunderstood because you speak strangely. You are misunderstood because you speak truth in a world addicted to illusion. The more conscious you become, the less compatible you are with unconscious lives. Depth is not democratic. It isolates before it elevates. It strips away comfort before granting sovereignty. It demands silence before granting clarity. And that clarity is what reshapes you. You start seeing how others depend on the very illusions that suffocate you. You see how people cling to narratives to avoid reflection, how they use noise to avoid introspection, how they choose comfort over truth. You see these patterns not with judgment, but with precision, because Jung was right. The deeper the mind, the heavier the burden of consciousness. Machiavelli simply added the price. To understand people too well is to walk apart from them. If this recognition unsettles you, good. It means the transformation has already begun. Part 3. There is a threshold you cross quietly, without ceremony. The moment you realize your mind no longer operates within the limits of ordinary perception, you start to understand that depth is not merely how you think. It is where you live. And once you live in depth, you cannot return to the surface without feeling suffocated. Jung called this the individuation of consciousness. The point where a psyche becomes so differentiated that it no longer belongs to the collective mind. Machiavelli would call it the birth of sovereignty. But to you, it feels like exile. Not punishment. Not tragedy. Exile. A self-imposed distance from the world that refuses to see itself. This distance is not physical. It is psychological. You walk beside people, but you do not walk with them. You listen to them, but you do not meet them. You speak, but you do not reveal yourself. Not because you are secretive, but because your depth is incompatible with their perception. You recognize their fears, their patterns, their inherited scripts, their avoided truths. And you know that revealing these insights would not liberate them. It would terrify them. Power is knowing what to withhold. You start to understand why your presence unsettles certain people, why your silence intimidates, why your words cut deeper than you intend. People feel seen by you in ways they do not know how to articulate. Depth has weight, and when you step into a room, that weight shifts the air. They feel it before they understand it, and instinctively, they react, some with admiration, some with fear, some with quiet resentment. Machiavelli warned that people fear those who understand them more than they understand themselves. You have lived this truth without ever seeking it. And here is the paradox that shapes the deepest minds. The more you understand people, the harder they become to trust. You see too clearly the motives behind kindness, the wounds behind cruelty, the insecurity behind arrogance. You see how most relationships are negotiations disguised as affection, how most conversations are performance disguised as connection, how most people speak to be heard, not understood, how they listen not to comprehend, but to respond. And the clearer this becomes, the more you withdraw. Not out of superiority, out of accuracy. Jung wrote that deep thinkers cannot tolerate surface-level interaction because their psyche recognizes the unconscious dynamics beneath every exchange. Machiavelli mirrored the same truth centuries earlier. The wise man sees the world in layers. And those who do not will always misinterpret him. To live with this awareness is to live at a distance that protects you, a distance that isolates you, a distance that becomes your shadow. But here is the deeper truth. Your mind was never meant to join the crowd. It was meant to outgrow it. Powerful people do not emerge from harmony. They emerge from dissonance, from misalignment, from the tension between who they are and what the world demands them to be. You were shaped by that tension, refined by it, hardened by it. Your depth was not accidental. It was forged, carved by childhood observations you were never supposed to understand, sharpened by patterns you noticed before you had words for them, polished by years of being told you were too much, too intense, too analytical. They were wrong. You were becoming. But becoming has a cost. And you have paid it in full. Because once you begin to see people through their unconscious patterns, their archetypal roles, their projected shadows, you realize something unsettling. Most people are not choosing their lives. Their lives are choosing them. They act out their conditioning like actors trapped in a script they never read. They move through the world half-conscious, responding to old wounds with new behaviors, calling it personality, calling it fate. You see it, they live it, and in that gap, you become a stranger. This is the existential loneliness Jung described, the loneliness of someone whose consciousness has expanded beyond the boundaries of the collective mind. But what Jung did not say explicitly, Machiavelli understood intuitively. Whoever sees clearly must walk carefully. Your insight is a blade. Even when sheathed, people feel its edge. You begin to speak less not because you lack thoughts, but because you possess too many that the world is not ready for. You begin to choose silence not as retreat, but as strategy. Silence becomes your shield, your vantage point, your weapon. It gives you access to truths that noise would drown. In silence, you read people. In silence, you understand them. In silence, you navigate their illusions while protecting your own reality. And eventually, something shifts. You stop trying to be understood. You start observing who tries to understand you. This is the turning point of the deep mind, the transition from loneliness to sovereignty, from exile to autonomy, from depth as burden to depth as power. You realize you do not need many people. You need the right ones. Those who think in layers. Those who feel in depths. Those whose silence speaks the same language as yours. Those rare few whose presence does not require translation. When depth meets depth, loneliness ends. But it happens rarely. And never by accident. You begin to understand why your standards rose without permission. Why meaningless conversations drain you. Why shallow connections exhaust you. Why you crave the kind of intimacy that exposes the psyche, not just the personality. Why you would rather be alone than misunderstood in company. This is not misanthropy. It is discernment. The deeper the water, the fewer the ships that can sail it. And yet, here is the final, unavoidable truth. Your mind will always operate at a depth that isolates you from the world. But it will never isolate you from yourself. You are your own witness. Your own mirror. your own terrain. And in that terrain, power grows silently. Machiavelli wrote, "The wise man acts in silence." Jung wrote that the individuated mind becomes its own authority. Together, they form the truth you have been living all along. Power is not the ability to control others. Power is the ability to remain yourself in a world that demands otherwise. Your depth is not a flaw to hide. It is a weapon to master. A perception that outpaces the crowd. A consciousness sculpted for complexity, clarity, and sovereignty. So hear this without fear, without flattery, without illusion. If this monologue unsettled you, it is because a part of you recognized yourself here. And recognition is dangerous. Recognition demands transformation. If you do not evolve now, you will be crushed by those who already have. But if you accept your depth, refine it, protect it, you will become the one thing the surface world cannot ignore. A mind that sees everything and reveals nothing.